Hello, students. In this lecture for the African American 2 history course, I'm going to be talking about the civil rights movement, but I'm going to focus on a particular topic in the civil rights movement that has not been talked about. What I'll be talking about today is focus on the Nashville Sit-Ins. A lot of y'all have never heard of Nashville Sit-Ins. It occurred during the sit-in movement that was occurring back in the early 1960s, where college students across the South was staging lunch counters in protest against segregation at the lunch counters. The Nashville Sit-Ins movement really got started right after the Greensboro Sit-In movement occurred. If a lot of y'all, some of y'all ever heard of the Greensboro Sit-Ins, the Greensboro Sit-Ins occurred on February 1st, 1960, where 4 college students from North Carolina, A&T staged a sit-in at the Woolworth lunch counters. This sit-in will cause spread from other cities across the South, and Nashville would be one of the cities that would be part of sit-ins. But one thing that people don't really know about the Nashville sit-ins is, despite the Greensboro sit-ins happening before the Nashville sit-ins, the Nashville sit-ins, students from Fisk University, Tennessee State A&I, now Tennessee State University, Meharry Medical College, and American Baptist College were staging sit-ins back in November, December 1959 at lunch counters downtown in Nashville. A lot of students who was trained by James Lawson in the National Christian Leadership Conference was training students in church basements on tactics of nonviolence on what they was going to encounter at the lunch counters. And a lot of students use those nonviolent tactics at lunch counters. So basically, what I'm saying, the Nashville sit-ins really could be argued could have been really the first sit-in before Greensboro. But the main issue why it wasn't is because right after the students staged sit-ins in November, December 1959, James Lawson, the student, decided over the winter break to resume sit-ins in early 1960. But the issue was Greensboro beat them to it in early February of doing the sit-ins. So that's the reason why Greensboro sit-ins get the credit as being the catalyst. Of course, it influenced other sit-ins to happen across the South and other places across North Carolina, Virginia. And, one of the reasons why the sit-ins in Nashville occurred was because of what happened in Greensboro. James Lawson got a call from one of the people who participate in the Greensboro sit-ins, where one of the people asked him if he would him and students join in the protest, and that's why James Lawson decided on February 13, 1966 to start the sit-ins. So that's something to know right there about the Nashville sit-ins right there that a lot of people don't know about. But the question is, though, what's significant about this sit-in, despite being a sit-in that occurred after the Greensboro as part of the sit-in movement? Well, of course, Nashville sit-ins was the best organized sit-ins of the movement, simply because of the discipline students received from James Lawson and being trained in different nonviolent tactics. They'll have church meetings where students would sit in chairs where other people will pretend to be like maybe a white supremacist segregationist, yelling out racial slurs and throwing things at them. Some of the things that they would counter at the lunch counters, doing it for real. So they want to train and practice them and how to react to that, where somebody push them, attack them, call them a racial name like the N-word or something, and how not to fight back and how to respond back to that. So that's what the sit-ins nonviolent workshop that James Lawson really started. James Lawson, who's a believer in nonviolence, who went to India, who believed in Gandhi ways of nonviolence, how he did against the village, decided to bring that to when he came to Nashville from up north and training students when he joined the National Christian Leadership Conference. And another thing significant about this Nashville sit-in is that, of course, it was college students from 4 of the well-known Nashville historical black colleges and universities, Fisk University, Tennessee State University, Meharry Medical College, and American Baptist College, all participant. And what came out of the Nashville sit-ins that people need to know is came out with really feature famous civil rights leaders like John Lewis, Diane Nash, James Bevel, Marion Barry, who was, of course, Washington D.C. Mayor. You know, there's a lot of stories behind him, and other future civil rights leaders. In fact, it's an interesting book called by Dave Herbst called The Chairman. I recommend y'all checking out. But displaying what the Nashville Sit-Ins, though, Nashville Sit-Ins occurred from February 13, 1960 to May 10, 1960. The Nashville Sit-Ins basically were among the early nonviolent direct action campaigns in the 60s to end racial segregation in the South. There was the first campaigns to desegregate lunch counters in Nashville, Tennessee, along with the Senate campaign. It was organized by the Nashville Student Movement and the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference. Especially the Nashville Student Movement came out of the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference. In fact, the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference basically was influenced by Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern Leadership Conference. So, you know, by one basically, but basically the students I told you already came from Fisk University, Tate State University, Harry Medical College, American Baptist College. Basically, the people that really led the group, part of the Nashville Student Movement, was people like Diane Nash and John Lewis, who was both students from Fisk University, who joined the movement. You know, on February 13, 1960, 2 days after the Greenberg sit-ins, well, 12 days before the Greenberg sit-ins occurred, local college students entered Crest and Woolworth and McKellen lunch counters downtown around 12:40 p.m. in downtown Nashville, Tennessee. After making their purchases at the stores, the students sat in at the lunch counter. Store owners immediately refused to serve the students and closed the lunch counter, claiming it was their moral right to determine when they would or not be served. The students continued the sit-ins over the next 3 months, expanding their targets to include lunch counters at Greyhound, Trailways, bus terminals, Grand Variety stores, Walgreens drugstore, and major Nashville department stores, Clona, Salone, and Harvey. So basically, the sit-ins basically expanded far from just Crest. You know, it went to other places like bus stations, Walgreens, and other places across the city too as well. And more students got involved. So this sit-in tackled a lot of other places that was segregated at the time between black and whites. The first violent response to the protest came February 27, 1960, which James Lawson and another protest leader called Big Saturday. The protest that day was attacked by a white group opposing desegregation. The police arrested 81 protesters, but none of the attackers were arrested. These arrests were found guilty of disorderly conduct. They all decided to serve time in jail rather than pay fines. As racial tension grew, Mayor Ben West appointed a biracial committee to investigate segregation in the city. Despite the committee's numerous attacks at compromise, the students declared that they would accept none less than the acknowledgement of their rights to sit at the lunch counters along with the white customers on April 5th. The committee suggested that the counters be divided into black and white sections. The National Christian Leadership Conference, which worked with the National Student Movement, rejected the proposal, arguing that segregation of the counters were no better than black exclusion from the time. On April 19, 1960, a bomb destroyed the house of Z. Alexandra Luby, the defense attorney representing many of the protesters. And it's very interesting about Z. Alexandra Luby. I call him he was like the Thurgood Marshall of kind of like Tennessee and Nashville, because he was really well known to be in a lot of high profile cases. In fact, him and Thurgood Marshall worked together doing a case that occurred in Columbia, Tennessee, back in 1946, where it was a riot between black and whites, and were defending about, I think, 25 of the blacks that attacked white cops, and 25 of the blacks got free. That's an interesting discussion right there, but let me get back to this. The bomb at Luby House targeted mass march to City Hall, where 2,500 protesters demanded answers from Mayor West. Diane Nash pointed asked Mayor West if it was wrong for a citizen of Nashville to discriminate against the fellow citizens because of his race or skin color. The mayor admitted that it was wrong, giving students an important symbolic victory in the campaign. Nash then asked the mayor if the lunch counter in Nashville should be desegregated, and the mayor agreed. So basically, Diane Nash confronted Mayor West and asked if it was for the lunch had to be desegregated, which he agreed. After weeks of secret negotiation between merchants and protest leaders, agreement was finally reached on the 1st of May. On May 10th, 1966, downtown stores opened their lunch counters to black customers for the first time. The customers arrived in groups of 2 or 3 during the afternoon, were served without incident. With that agreement, Nashville became the first major southern city to desegregate all public facilities. The Nashville campaign became a model for other civil rights protests in the 1960s and 1970s. So basically, this Nashville city was significant about it. It was the first, Nashville became the first city to desegregate lunch counters even 2 months before Greensboro's did, which they did in July. So, and Nashville, of course, was the best organized and most disciplined of the sit-in campaign. Even Martin Luther King came to Nashville, I think, when he made a speech as fist and admired students for the organization of the sit-ins. So that's one thing unique about the Nashville sit-ins. The reason why I brought this topic up, because this is something that really not taught to a lot of students at school about this Nashville sit-ins. You know, usually we hear about the civil rights movement. You might hear about, you know, Emmett Till, Brown versus Board education. You might hear Rosa Parks, Montgomery bus boycott. You'll hear about Marshall Washington, I Got a Dream speech. But these are some of the little campaigns, it's things that a lot of people don't really hear about, you know, with especially, you know, involvement in the student. And what's significant in Nashville sit-ins, like I mentioned, is that it created a lot of future civil rights leaders and people like John Lewis, people like Diane Nash, people like James Bevel, Marion Barry, and they were going to be a part of a lot of the major campaigns during that time, like the Freedom Rides. You will see the creation of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, where many was members and founders. They will go on to, you know, similar to Montgomery marches, you know, the Birmingham campaign. You know, I can name on and on and on and on. Many of how influential this Nashville sit-ins campaign was. You know, a lot of people, you know, not really talk about. So that's the thing about history. You know, we got to really study about. You know, we got to study things that are known, not well known too. Though, you know, the more you dig in history and research, and not just Black history, any history period, you'll get more knowledge, experience, and understanding how things are and stuff. So, you know, every history should be talked about and ignored. Basically, that's what my lecture, though. You know, I just wanted to dig in a little bit in the Nashville sit-ins campaign, because myself being a Nashville native, I think it's just a very fascinating topic. I did my thesis on this topic, and I think it's some people that really need to know and understand, and how to, not only that the Nashville sit-ins had a major impact in the sit-in movement as being the first city to desegregate lunch counters, but also in the whole civil rights movement, like the people that came out of it, and how very influential this sit-ins was, and very important, and that need to talk about. But I hope students today enjoy my lectures in class. I might give y'all a quiz this weekend. I hope you have a good night and a good day. Thanks.